The mop never made a sound the way she moved it. That was something the night janitors at Meridian Financial learned quickly, that Adaize Okonkwo had a way of working that didn't announce itself. No clattering bucket wheels, no squeaking rubber soles against marble tile. Just the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who had long ago made peace with being the last person in the building and the first to be forgotten. If you've ever done work that mattered deeply, work that held something together, and found yourself completely invisible to the people whose world depended on it, this channel was made for you. We tell the stories that rarely get told. If that speaks to something in you, consider subscribing. We're building a community of people who understand that dignity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up before dawn with a mop and a quiet certainty. Adaize was 51 years old, and she had been cleaning the 42nd floor of the Meridian Financial Tower for 11 years. 11 years is a long time to be invisible. Long enough to know that the man in the corner office took his coffee black, but left 3 rings on his desk every morning. Long enough to know that the young analyst named Marcus kept a photograph of his daughter tucked inside his keyboard drawer, face up, so he could see it when the nights ran long. Long enough to know that someone on the compliance team cried in the bathroom on the last Friday of every month. She had come from Nigeria 23 years earlier with an accounting degree and 2 suitcases. The accounting degree had taken a long time to use. The cleaning contract had come first, because rent arrived before opportunity did, and because Adaize Okonkwo was the kind of woman who did not wait for conditions to improve before she began to work. Her husband, Emmanuel, drove a city bus on the early morning route. Their daughter, Chisholm, was a junior in college studying biomedical engineering. These were the facts that mattered most. These were the reasons the mop moved quietly through the marble corridors of a building that had never thought to ask her name. The 42nd floor housed the executive suite. 6 corner offices. A boardroom with a walnut table that cost more than Adaize earned in 4 years. A private kitchen. A hallway lined with framed photographs of men shaking hands with other men, signing things, smiling for cameras, standing before city skylines with the confidence of people who had never questioned whether they belonged. Adaize cleaned all of it. She cleaned the walnut table with the specific cloth it required. She cleaned the espresso machine, according to the laminated instructions she had memorized in her first week. She cleaned the framed photographs carefully, leaving no smudge on the glass that covered all those confident faces. She had learned early that invisibility had its own code of conduct. You did not make eye contact unless someone spoke to you first. You did not use the executive bathroom on your shift, even when your knees were aching. You did not linger near the offices when someone was working late, because sometimes people noticed more than they let on, and what they noticed became what they said to the contract manager, and what they said could end 11 years of quiet work in a single email. The contract was held by a company called Pristine Solutions. Adaize was not employed by Meridian Financial. This was the other invisible wall, the one that existed on paper, separating the people who owned the building from the people who kept it clean. Pristine Solutions had a supervisor named Todd, who called once a month to check on client satisfaction, and who had never, in 11 years, asked Adaize whether she was satisfied with anything. The pay was $19, $40 an hour. It had been $19, $40 an hour for 3 years, held in place by a contract clause that Todd had explained using words she understood perfectly, but chose not to argue about, because arguing was not something that kept the contract, and keeping the contract was what kept Chisholm in college. The 42nd floor had a rhythm. Most nights, Adaize arrived at 10:30, after the last of the analysts had gone. She began with the common areas, then moved to the offices working east to west, finishing with the boardroom, which she always saved last because it required the most care and because there was something in the quiet of that large, empty table she had learned, over years, to find almost restful. She had seen things in 11 years that most people in that building would never see. A resignation letter, folded into quarters and pushed to the back of a drawer. A child's drawing, crayon, a stick family, daddy in careful letters, taped to the underside of a credenza hidden from view. She had found all of these things and said nothing, because silence was the code. And the code had kept her here for 11 years, and here was where she needed to be. She worked east to west, She cleaned the walnut table with the correct cloth. She cleaned the espresso machine according to the protocol. She made her entries in the maintenance binder, dates, products used, her initials, in the careful handwriting her mother had made her practice until it was right. By the time she rode the service elevator down, the 42nd floor was exactly what it was supposed to be. A space so well maintained it was invisible, like all the best work. The trouble began on a Tuesday in March. It did not begin dramatically. Trouble rarely does when it is designed to look like procedure. It began with a new supervisor. His name was Derek Haynes, hired by Pristine Solutions 6 weeks earlier to oversee a quality optimization review of its most significant commercial contracts. Derek was 34. He wore shirts slightly too large for him and carried a tablet everywhere, consulting it frequently in the way of someone who needed the room to register his arrival. He came to the 42nd floor on a Tuesday evening at 11, when a Daisy was halfway through the common areas. She heard him before she saw him, the elevator bell, the particular walk of someone who needed spaces to notice him. She kept working. She had learned that keeping working was almost always the right choice. "You're a Daisy?" he said. She looked up. "Yes." He consulted his tablet. "Okonkwo?" "Yes." He made a note. She could not see what it said. He looked around the kitchen she was cleaning, at the counter she had just wiped, at the espresso machine, and then looked back at her with the expression of someone who had already formed a conclusion and was now performing the act of forming one. "I'm going to need you to redo the espresso machine," he said. "The manufacturer's protocol requires descaling every 30 days, and the log shows the last recorded descaling was 41 days ago." Adaize put down her cloth. "I descaled it 28 days ago. I record it in the log binder, not the digital system. The binder is in the supply cabinet." Derek looked at his tablet. "The digital system is the official record. The digital system has an error. I can show you the binder." "The digital system," Derek said again in the tone of someone closing a door, "is the official record." She got the binder. She showed him the entry, her handwriting, the date, the product, her initials. He looked at it for a long moment, holding it slightly away from his body. "I'll note this discrepancy," he said. He put the binder down on the counter, not back in the cabinet, and made another entry in his tablet. "I'm going to need a formal descaling completed tonight and documented in the digital system." Adaize looked at him. She looked at the binder. She looked at the espresso machine she had cleaned 28 days ago. "All right," she said. She put the binder back in the cabinet. Then she got the descaling solution. This was the first incident. There would be 6 more in the following 3 weeks. The second was a written notice citing inconsistent documentation practices. The third was a surprise inspection during which Derek shone a small flashlight at the baseboard behind a filing cabinet that was bolted to the wall. He photographed the dust there. He documented it. The fourth was the one that changed the weight of things. It happened on a Friday at 11:45, when a compliance officer named Patricia Chen was working late. Patricia was one of the few people on the 42nd floor who sometimes said a real hello to Adaize, not the performed kind that was really a way of saying, "I see you, and now we are both relieved," but a genuine one, the kind that continued into brief conversations about weather or the city outside the windows at night. Derek arrived at 11:45 and conducted his inspection in front of Patricia. This was new. Before he had come when Adaize was alone. He moved through the suite with his flashlight, into the boardroom where he crouched near the base of the walnut table and ran a gloved finger along the table leg, slowly, looking at Patricia the entire time with the expression of someone performing a demonstration. He held up his gloved fingertip. There was a faint grey line. "This is what I'm talking about," he said. Patricia said carefully, "Derek, it's 4 hours into her shift. She hasn't done the boardroom yet." Derek looked at his tablet. The inspection time was not pre-communicated, which is standard protocol. Patricia looked at Adaize. Adaize said nothing. The code said, "Say nothing." The code said, "Let the silence be professional." She stood with her cart near the doorway, and she breathed slowly, and she thought of Chisholm's face in the photograph on the refrigerator at home, the one from her first day of college, the green duffel bag, the smile trying not to cry. She thought of that photograph and she breathed, and she said nothing. Derek filed a formal performance concern report the following Monday. It cited 3 items: the espresso machine documentation, the baseboard, and what he described as observed lack of proactive engagement during client-facing quality review, which was how he documented the fact that Adaeze had stood in a doorway without speaking. Todd called on a Wednesday. He sounded tired in the way of people relaying someone else's decision. He said Pristine Solutions would need to reassess her assignment if further concerns were documented. He said the word "unfortunately" 3 times. He said he valued her years of service. He did not say "I am sorry," he did not say "this is wrong," he said the client relationship is paramount. Adaeze listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "I understand, Todd." Because she did understand. She understood exactly what was happening. Understanding something and being able to stop it were not the same thing, and she had known that for a long time. She hung up and sat at her kitchen table for 20 minutes. Emmanuel was on shift. Chisholm was in class. The apartment was very quiet. She sat with her hands flat on the table and she breathed. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being seen clearly by a system that has already decided what to do with you. It is not the pain of being misunderstood. It is worse than that. It is the pain of being perfectly understood, of having someone look at 11 years of quiet, impeccable work and understand precisely what it is worth to them, which is nothing that inconveniences them. It is the pain of knowing that the binder is true and the digital system is false, and that falsehood will win because falsehood has a contract and truth has only a binder. Adaeze had felt this pain before. She recognized it the way you recognize a road in the dark, not by seeing it clearly, but by the feeling of the ground beneath you. She did not stop working. This is the part hardest to explain to people who have not lived it, the way that continuing becomes its own form of resistance, not dramatic resistance, not the kind that gets photographed or described in reports. Just the quiet daily decision to not let them define the terms, to show up at 10:30, to move the mop without sound, to clean the walnut table with the correct cloth, to be in every measurable and unmeasurable way exactly what you have always been, regardless of what any report says you are. Emmanuel knew something was wrong because she stopped humming. Adaeze hummed when she cooked, when she sorted laundry, when she sat with tea before bed. She had hummed since childhood, hymns from her mother's church in Enugu, songs whose words she sometimes forgot, but whose melodies she carried in her chest like a second heartbeat. Emmanuel had told her once, early in their marriage, "The humming is how I know you are all right." When it stopped, he noticed on the second evening. He waited until Sunday, until they were sitting after dinner with the television off, and he said simply, "Tell me." She told him everything. The binder, Derek's flashlight, Patricia's careful silence, Todd's 3 unfortunate unfortunates. The way Derek had looked at her, not with cruelty exactly, but with something worse than cruelty. A look that did not see her as someone to harm, a look that did not see her at all. Emmanuel listened without speaking. When she was done, he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to keep my contract," she said, "and if you can't, I want it on record that I kept it anyway." She looked at her hands. "I want Chisholm to know that her mother didn't leave on someone else's terms." Emmanuel reached across the table and put his hand over hers. They sat like that for a while, with the sound of the street outside and the building settling around them, and Adaeze felt something shift, not resolve because resolve she had always had, but something quieter, closer to peace. She was not going to fight in the way Derek wanted her to fight. She was not going to give him a scene. She was going to be completely, immaculately, undeniably herself, and she was going to document everything. She began the documentation that week, not the aggressive documentation of someone preparing a lawsuit. She documented the way her grandmother had taught her to keep accounts, carefully, without drama, with dates and times and precise language. She bought a small notebook that fit in her uniform pocket, and every night before she left the building, she wrote what had happened and what she had done and who had been present. She also, quietly, sent an email. Not to Derek, not to Todd. She sent it to the building's compliance office, the institutional compliance function, listed on the internal website under contractor concerns. The email was one paragraph. It stated her name, her contract, her years of service, and the fact that the performance concern report contained inaccuracies. It asked whether there was a formal dispute process. She did not expect a response. She expected the kind that was really a non-response, an acknowledgement number, something filed correctly and forgotten. What she received instead was a brief reply from a woman named Sandra Obi, in compliance, who said she had reviewed the email and needed to see the relevant documentation. She asked Adiz to send the binder entries. Adiz photographed every page and sent them. This was in the 3rd week of April. In the 4th week of April, Derek conducted 2 more inspections and filed 1 more concern report, noting what he called resistant communication patterns. Patricia Chen, present during one of these inspections, sent Adaisy a text afterward. It said, "I saw, I'm sorry." Adaisy appreciated the text. She did not reply to it, because she did not want Patricia involved in whatever was coming. Patricia had her own job to protect, but the text mattered, because honesty in a building full of diplomatic silence was its own kind of gift. She kept working. She kept the notebook. She breathed slowly on the nights Derek came, and she documented what he said and what she said, and what the floor looked like before and after, and she found that documenting helped in a way difficult to explain, not because it made her feel powerful, but because it made her feel real, as if her account of events existed in some form that could not be told otherwise. The 5th and 6th concern reports arrived in the 1st week of May. The 5th concerned a smudge on the glass of a framed photograph, inspected 4 hours after she had left the building. The 6th cited her response during his most recent inspection. He had asked her to explain her cleaning sequence. She had explained it, and he had documented her explanation as unable to clearly articulate established protocol. Todd called again. This time he did not say unfortunately. He said Pristine Solutions was considering reassignment with 30 days' notice. Adiz said, "I would like the reassignment in writing with the specific performance citations included." Todd paused. "That's standard. That's fine. And I would like the full inspection documentation from the last 6 weeks. All 6 reports with timestamps." Another pause. "I'll need to check what we're authorized to share." "Please do," she said. "I'm asking because I want to understand what I need to improve, that's all." She could hear Todd deciding whether to believe this. The silence on the line lasted long enough that she heard him breathe. "I'll get those to you," he said. She had the documents within 48 hours. She read them carefully with her notebook open beside her. Then she organized everything: her notebook entries, the binder photographs, the 6 reports, Todd's emails, Sandra Obi's reply, into a folder on her phone. She labeled it simply, Record. She did not know what she would do with the record. She knew only that it existed, that she had built it accurately, and that this was the only form of power available to her at the moment. In the 3rd week of May, 2 things happened. The first, Sandra Obi sent a follow-up email. The compliance review of Adaisy's binder documentation had been completed, and a discrepancy had been noted between the physical binder record and the digital system entries in 4 of the 6 complaint instances. The discrepancy was being referred to the internal audit team. The process would take 4 to 6 weeks. Adiz read this email 3 times. Then she made a cup of tea and sat with it until it was cool. The second thing happened on a Friday morning, 2 days after the Sandra Obi email. Adiz did not witness the second thing. She was asleep. She worked nights. And Friday mornings, she slept until 9. She was told about it by Patricia Chen in a text sent at 10:17 a.m. The text said, "They had a board meeting this morning, 6:45. I think something happened. The building is very strange today." What had happened was this. The board of directors of Meridian Financial held their quarterly meeting on the last Friday of the month. Board members typically arrived between 7:45 and 8. That Friday, one board member arrived at 6:45. Her name was Dr. Constance Adeyemi. She was 70 years old, a former federal judge, 9 years on the board. She arrived early because she always arrived early to quarterly meetings, not to the meeting itself, but to the building. She liked to walk the floors before the day began. She had done this for 9 years without comment, because board members arriving early was exactly the kind of thing no one thought to stop. Dr. Adeyemi was on the 42nd floor at 6:52 in the morning. Adesi's shift ended at 6:30. They had never met, never been in the same room. But Dr. Adeyemi walked through the executive suite at 6:52, and what she found was a floor that was immaculate, not merely clean, immaculate. The walnut table had been polished to a depth that caught the early light from the east windows. The espresso machine gleamed. The framed photographs had no smudge. The baseboards, where accessible, were clear. Dr. Adeyemi had grown up in Lagos and come to this country at 22. She had cleaned offices. She had done this while studying for the bar exam, quietly and without drama, and she had not spoken about it often. She walked through the 42nd floor, and she noticed the work the way you notice something when you have done it yourself and know what it costs. She noticed the detail in the corners, the care taken with surfaces that no one would check, the evidence of a discipline that existed not because anyone was watching, but because that was the standard being held. She asked the building security desk, before the rest of the board arrived, who cleaned the 42nd floor. The desk attendant told her the contract was with Pristine Solutions. She asked for the name of the worker assigned to the executive suite. He wasn't sure. He called Building Services. Building Services said they would need to contact the contract supervisor. Dr. Adeyemi said, "Please do." She said it in the voice she had used as a federal judge, not loud, not unkind, entirely unarguable. The board meeting proceeded at 8. It covered what it always covered. Dr. Adeyemi participated, as she always did. She raised no issues related to the cleaning contract. She asked no questions about Pristine Solutions. She noted nothing in the official record about the condition of the floor. What she did after the meeting was have a 20-minute conversation with the building's general manager. His name was Robert Tran, 22 years in facilities management. He listened for most of the 20 minutes and spoke for approximately 3. What he said: he had seen the audit referral in the system. He had known about the documentation discrepancy since Sandra Obi's referral. He had been waiting to see how the process resolved before acting. Dr. Adeyemi said, "How long has she worked this contract?" 11 years, Robert said. There was a silence, long enough to be a complete sentence. 4 to 6 weeks is too long, she said, simply, without accusation, the way you say something that is both a statement and a direction. Robert Tran nodded. "I'll move the timeline." The timeline moved. The audit review, projected at 4 to 6 weeks, was completed in 11 days. Its findings of the 6 formal performance concern reports filed by Derek Haynes, 4 contained documentation inconsistent with physical records. In 2 cases, timestamps on the digital entries did not correspond with actual inspection times in the building access log. In one case, a concern listed as observed during scheduled inspection had been filed on a night when Derek's access card showed no entry to the 42nd floor at all. The audit also reviewed the executive suite's cleaning inspection history for the previous 36 months. In that period, independent quarterly quality assessments, conducted by a third-party vendor unrelated to Pristine Solutions, had rated the 42nd floor at above standard or excellent in every single cycle. Every single cycle. The report was 8 pages. It was sent to the general manager, to Meridian's legal team, to the compliance office, and to Pristine Solutions' oversight department. It was not sent to Derek Haynes. Derek was notified separately by Pristine Solutions' own HR. Adais learned about the audit from Sandra Obi's email on a Thursday morning at 8:15, less than 2 hours after she had come home from her shift. She read it on her phone in the half-darkness of a curtain that didn't quite close. She read it once. She read it twice. She put the phone face down on the mattress and lay very still. Emmanuel was on shift. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city was moving, indifferent, enormous, full of people with their own weights to carry. She lay in the quiet and she breathed. She did not cry. She noticed that she didn't, and she thought about what that meant, and decided it meant that somewhere in the 3 months since that first Tuesday in March, she had spent whatever was available for crying. Not because she was hardened. She was not hardened. But because she had known somewhere underneath everything that the record was true, and that the record being true had to be enough, and she had made that enough. The outside world had finally caught up to what she had already accepted. She got up and went to the kitchen and made tea and stood at the window and watched the street. The consequences came over the following 2 weeks. Derek Haynes was placed on administrative leave by Pristine Solutions, pending a review of his contractor performance processes. The review took 6 days and resulted in his separation from the company. Todd called Adaize on a Tuesday afternoon. This call was different. His voice had a different quality, not warmth exactly, but the specific absence of the tired relay tone he had used before. He sounded like himself, whatever that was. "The performance concern reports have been removed from your file," he said. "All 6. As of today, your record shows no open concerns." "All right," Adaize said. "We would also like to discuss your compensation." "There's a reclassification that's been recommended." He said a number. It was $6 more per hour than she currently made. She was quiet for a moment. "When would that take effect?" "Retroactive to the beginning of the review period. We're treating that as the appropriate adjustment." She wrote the number down in her notebook. She wrote, "retroactive." "Thank you, Todd," she said. A letter arrived by email from the general manager's office, signed by Robert Tran. It was brief. It said that Meridian Financial valued the service record associated with the 42nd floor's maintenance contract and wished to express appreciation for the work performed over an extended period. It did not say her name. It was addressed to valued contractor, but it said what it said, and someone had chosen to write it, and Adaize put it in the folder labeled Record at the very end. The third thing that came was the one she had not expected. 3 weeks after the audit, on a Friday morning when Adaize had just arrived home from her shift, her phone rang with an unknown number. She answered on the 4th ring. The woman's voice was measured and clear. "Ms. Okonkwo, this is Constance Adeyemi. I'm on the board of Meridian Financial. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Adaize stood in her kitchen in her coat, keys still in her hand. "It's fine," she said. "Good morning." "Good morning," Dr. Adeyemi said. "I'll be brief, because I imagine you've had a long night. I wanted to call personally to say that I became aware of what happened and of how you handled it, and that it was important for me to say this directly. What you did, keeping that record, continuing to work the way you did, maintaining your standard, that takes a particular kind of character." Adaize was quiet. "I know you don't know me," Dr. Adeyemi continued. "I want you to know that I have not forgotten what that kind of work costs, and I wanted you to hear that from someone who has done it." Adaize sat down slowly in the kitchen chair. She still had her coat on. Her keys were on the table. "Thank you," she said. The words came out simply, without the decorative humility she sometimes attached to things to make them easier for other people. Just thank you. Direct and meant. "You don't need to say anything else," Dr. Adeyemi said. "I just needed you to hear it." They said goodbye. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Adaize sat with her hands flat on the kitchen table. And this time, at an unlike the other time she had sat at this table with something heavy, she let herself stay there, not because she was gathering herself to endure something, but because for the first time in months there was nothing left to endure. She called Emmanuel between his roots. She told him quickly the reports were cleared. The pay was adjusted. She had spoken to someone on the board. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. "I think I am." She heard the sound of the bus, the street, the city that was always moving around all of them. "I'm going to make your favorite for dinner," he said. She laughed. It surprised her, the way it came out, full and real, without preparation. She hadn't laughed like that in 3 months. "Okay," she said, "come home." She called Chisholm in the afternoon. Chisholm was between classes. Adaize told her only the outline, that there had been a difficulty at work and that it had been resolved. Chisholm said, "Mom, I know when you're leaving things out." Adaize said, "I'll tell you everything at Christmas." "You promise?" I promise. Are you really okay? Adaze looked out the window at the afternoon light on the building across the street. Yes, she said. I really am. She slept that afternoon for 5 hours, the deep, unguarded sleep of someone who has put something down and doesn't need to pick it back up. When she woke, the light had changed. Emmanuel was in the kitchen. She could smell stockfish and plantains from the bedroom, the smell of a Sunday even though it was a weekday, the smell of a household marking something without ceremony because they did not need witnesses. They had each other and the food and the quiet between two people who know each other well enough not to explain things. She went back to work the following Monday. Nothing had changed on the 42nd floor, which was exactly as it should be. The walnut table was there. The espresso machine was there. The framed photographs lined the hallway. The leather chairs waited in their arrangement. The private kitchen had its supplies and its laminated instructions. Adaze set up her cart at 10:30 and began with the common areas. She worked east to west as she always had. She cleaned the walnut table with the correct cloth. She cleaned the espresso machine according to the protocol she had memorized 12 years ago. She made an entry in the binder. She had always made entries in the binder. She would continue. Not because the binder had saved her, it had. But that was not why she kept it. She kept it because accuracy was not a defensive measure. Accuracy was what you owed to your own account of events. You kept the record because the record was true, not because you expected it to be believed. Sometimes it was believed anyway. That was the part you could not control, and so you did not plan around it. You kept the record regardless. By midnight she had reached the boardroom. She moved the chairs back from the table one by one and cleaned beneath them. She cleaned the table in slow, overlapping passes. She cleaned the windows from inside, where the east-facing glass showed the city in its nighttime reduction. Light blocks and dark blocks, the bridge with its suspension cables, the river catching the reflection of the sky. She stood at the window when she was done. The city was enormous and indifferent and full of people she would never know. She had always known this. What she also knew, standing in the silence after the work was complete, was that this was not a sad thing. It was simply the size of the world, and you did your work in the part of the world that was yours to keep. She turned off the light, gathered her cart and rode the service elevator to the basement. She signed out and walked out into the early morning, which was cold the way early mornings in that city were cold, sharply, briefly, like something reminding you it was there. She walked to the bus stop 3 blocks away. There was no one else at the stop at that hour. She sat on the bench and put her bag on her lap and looked at the street. The bus was 11 minutes away. She put her phone in her pocket and sat in the quiet that was available at that hour. Not comfortable, not peaceful, but honest. The kind that doesn't try to be anything. She thought about the people in the office buildings around her, the ones who would arrive in a few hours and pour coffee from machines that had been cleaned in the night, who would work at desks that had been polished, who would conduct their days in spaces held together by work they never thought about. She did not think about this with bitterness. She thought about it the way you think about the weather, as the shape of things. The bus came. She got on. She rode in the yellow light of the early morning with the other people who came home when the city was waking up. Nurses and hotel workers, and the man from the 24-hour pharmacy, and the young woman she had seen on this bus for 2 years, and whose name she did not know. And all of them riding together in the particular companionship of people who share a direction without sharing anything else. At her stop, she got off and walked the 4 blocks home. She climbed the stairs, unlocked the door. She took off her coat and shoes and uniform, showered in the dark because the light felt too bright at that hour, put on the old t-shirt she slept in, and went to the bedroom. On the nightstand, Emmanuel had left a note. He sometimes did this, brief things in his careful handwriting. This one said, "The plantains are in the pan, heat at low. 11 years of cleaning a floor in a building that had tried in the end to decide she didn't exist. 3 months of being walked past with a flashlight by a man who had needed her to be less than she was. 1 phone call from a woman who had once done what she did and had not forgotten what it cost. The plantains were in the pan." She folded the note and put it in the drawer where she kept his notes. Years of them, accumulated in the way that small ordinary things accumulate when the life they belong to is a good one. She got into bed. She did not set an alarm because her body would wake her when it was time. She lay in the quiet and thought briefly about the notebook in her uniform pocket, the small one she had bought in March that she had filled page by careful page. She would not need it the way she had needed it, but she would keep it, not as a record of difficulty, as a record of having been in that difficulty entirely herself. There is a story people tell, usually people who have never needed to, about dignity as something you find or earn or are given, as if it were an award. Adaeze Okonkwo had never understood it that way. Dignity was not a thing you were given. It was a thing you kept. You kept it in the way you moved the mop, in the way you wrote the date in the binder, in the way you said all right to a supervisor, relaying someone else's decision without flinching. You kept it on the nights when no one was watching, and on the nights when someone was watching with a flashlight, looking for reasons. You kept it the way you kept anything that mattered, through simple, daily, unremarkable attention. She had kept it. The boardroom table had been cleaned. The espresso machine had been descaled 28 days ago, not 41. And the record was true, and it had been checked by people with authority to check it. And it said, what she said, it said. The 11 years were in the record, and the record was in the audit, and the audit was in the file, and the file existed saying this work was done and done correctly, and done by a person who did not need to be watched to do it right. Outside the city continued. Buses ran their routes, buildings opened their doors. The day shift began, in offices and hospitals and restaurants and construction sites, and all the places where the world's work was done, much of it visible, much of it not, almost all of it depending on the invisible work that had made it possible. She did not think these large thoughts as she fell asleep. She was too tired. She thought instead about the plantains and Emmanuel's handwriting, and the light in Chisholm's face in the photograph on the refrigerator. And these thoughts were enough, and they were the right thoughts. In the boardroom on the 42nd floor, the walnut table held the morning light. There was no one in the room. There would be people in it soon. Men and women who would set their coffee cups down, spread their materials, make decisions about money and risk and the future of things belonging to people they would never meet. They would do this work with the focus of people who understand that their work is serious and visible and consequential. They would not think about the table. The table would simply be clean, the way it was always clean, maintained by hands that had moved through those rooms since before any of them held their current titles. They would not think about it. And that was fine. Adaeze Okonkwo did not need them to think about it. She had needed the record to be true, and the record was true. She had needed her rate to reflect her work, and it now did. She had needed one person, just one, to call and say, I know what that cost, and one person had. Everything else was the same as it had always been. The floor was clean, the work was done. The morning light moved across the table as the sun rose higher. It caught the grain of the walnut in slow angles, moving the way light moves through spaces that are very still. Incrementally, almost apologetically, as if aware it is entering something that was quiet before it came and will be quiet after it leaves. The chairs sat in their arrangement. The windows held the city. In an apartment 4 miles away, a woman who had worked all night slept the sleep of someone who had carried something heavy and set it down carefully, in the right place, at the right time. That afternoon, before she woke, Chisholm called Emmanuel. Is Mom okay? She asked. She sounded different. Emmanuel was on his break, sitting with a sandwich in the bus depot. She's okay, he said. She's better than okay. What happened? She'll tell you at Christmas. Dad, he smiled. She kept her record, he said, and the record was right, and in the end it mattered. Chisholm was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. That's good. It is, he said. It really is. When Adaeze woke at 3 in the afternoon, she heated the plantains at low. She ate them standing at the stove looking out the window, because standing at the stove eating plantains from the pan was one of the small private pleasures she allowed herself, the kind that existed outside of records and reports and all formal measures of how a person conducts themselves. She ate all of them. She washed the pan, she made tea. Then she sat at the table with the tea and the late afternoon light coming through the window, and she was simply there, not waiting, not preparing, not enduring, just there, just herself. Just quiet. She started humming. She didn't notice it at first. It came the way it always came, without announcement, from somewhere in the chest, one of her mother's hymns whose words she sometimes couldn't remember, but whose melody she had carried since childhood. She hummed it softly in the warm kitchen, with the tea cooling in front of her and the city outside. When Emmanuel came home, he heard her before he opened the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment, keys in his hand, just listening. Then he opened the door and came inside. She looked up. They didn't say anything because nothing needed to be said. The humming was enough. The humming was everything. There's a kind of work that holds the world together without ever being seen. Work done in the hours before dawn, in buildings that forget you exist the moment you step into the elevator. And sometimes, rarely, the record you kept of yourself in those quiet hours turns out to be the most unshakable thing in the room. Have you ever worked hard at something that mattered, something no one seemed to notice, and found that keeping your own record straight was the only dignified thing left to do? Tell us about it in the comments. We read everyone.